Ask my father, who literally was shot in the Orangeburg Massacre, right? Who helped found SNCC, who marched with Marion Barry and Stokely Carmichael and Martin Luther King.
Let me take you through a fascinating exchange that unfolded recently, one that cuts straight to the heart of how debates about race, progress, and reality play out in today's media landscape. It all starts with a personal story, a powerful one. Imagine asking someone whose father was shot during the Orangeburg Massacre, a man who helped found the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, marched alongside giants like H. Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, and Martin Luther King, Jr., and carried the weight of that history into the present day. That father, according to Bakari Sellers, a CNN commentator, feels that America in 2025 is no different from the America of 1954. That's a bold claim, one steeped in emotion and lived experience, and it's the kind of statement that sets the stage for a clash of perspectives. Now, picture this father's story being brought into a heated discussion on Bill Maher's show, where Sellers squared off against Ben Shapiro, the sharp-tongued conservative commentator from the Daily Wire. The topic? Race in America. Sellers leaned heavily on his father's experience, arguing that dismissing those feelings is absurd, even offensive. Shapiro, on the other hand, countered with a call for precision, urging the conversation to focus on measurable realities, rather than emotional narratives alone. And Maher, he stepped in as the voice of reason, poking holes in both sides while trying to keep the discussion grounded. What unfolded was a masterclass in how facts, feelings, and media personas collide. And it's worth breaking down step by step. First, let's set the scene. Sellers has built a reputation as someone quick to play what his critics call the race card. It's a tactic that's earned him both fans and detractors. When he's losing an argument, they say, he pivots to personal anecdotes or systemic grievances, framing his opponent as out of touch. Shapiro, meanwhile, thrives on dismantling arguments with data and logic, often accused of being cold or dismissive in the process. Their face-off on Maher's show wasn't just a debate, it was a showdown between two worldviews, one rooted in lived experience and the other in statistical scrutiny. The clip that sparked this whole exchange came from Sellers taking a swipe at Shapiro's intellect. He suggested that Shapiro, and others like him, lack the depth for honest discussions, instead profiting off fear-mongering. It's a bold jab, especially considering Shapiro's track record as a debater and his ability to draw massive audiences. Sellers framed it as a contrast. Shapiro's a millionaire built on divisive rhetoric, while he, Sellers, speaks from a place of authenticity tied to his father's civil rights legacy. The stage was set for a reckoning. When they finally went head-to-head, Shapiro didn't hold back. He argued that the race debate is riddled with confounds, variables that muddy the waters. Unless you isolate those factors, he said, you end up blaming vague concepts like implicit bias, which he called nearly impossible to measure with any rigor. It's a classic Shapiro move. Demand clarity, reject fuzzy reasoning. Sellers' response? A quip. I don't know what he just said. The audience laughed, but it was a dodge, a way to sidestep the point without engaging it. Shapiro wasn't. Speaking in riddles, he was simply saying that pinning everything on shadowy, unquantifiable forces oversimplifies a complex issue. And he's got a point. How do you solve a problem you can't even define? That's when Sellers brought up his father. He recounted the Orangeburg Massacre, a 1968 tragedy where police killed 3 black students protesting segregation, and tied it to his father's activism with SNCC, his marches with civil rights icons, and his belief that America hasn't moved forward since 1954. It's a gut punch of a story, no question. But Shapiro didn't flinch. He didn't deny the pain or the history. He challenged the conclusion. Feelings, he argued, don't dictate reality. Just because Sellers' father feels like it's 1954 doesn't mean it is. Maher jumped in. Here, agreeing with Shapiro, emotions can cloud judgment, and claiming America hasn't progressed since the civil rights era is a stretch that defies evidence. This is where the debate gets juicy. Sellers accused Shapiro of dismissing his father's experience, implying that only those who've lived it can truly understand. It's a common refrain. If you're not part of the group, you don't get a say. Shapiro pushed back hard. I'm a sentient human being, he said, rejecting the idea that identity trumps reason. Maher, ever the skeptic, added a gem. You can be too far from an issue to grasp it, or too close to see it clearly. It's a brilliant observation, Victims of injustice have unique perspectives, sure, but that doesn't make them infallible. Proximity can breed bias just as distance can breed ignorance. Sellers doubled down, insisting his father's lived experience carried undeniable weight. Shapiro countered with an analogy. If he, as a Jew, claimed life in America today was worse than in 1939 Europe, he'd be wrong. Demonstrably so. Likewise, he said, it's crazy to argue that Black Americans in 2025 face conditions akin to 1954 Alabama. He wasn't denying racism's persistence, he was rejecting hyperbole. And the facts back him up. In the 1960s, segregation was law. Jim Crow enforced separate schools, buses, and water fountains. Voting rights were suppressed with violence and literacy tests. The Selma March saw peaceful protesters brutalized by police. Today, Black Americans serve as senators, CEOs, and cultural icons. Laws ban discrimination outright. Progress isn't perfection, but it's real. Yet Sellers clung to the narrative, painting Shapiro's pushback as callous. It's a tactic that's worked for him and others like Joy Reid or Sunny Hostin because it flips the script. Challenge the story, and you're the villain. But Shapiro and Maher weren't buying it. Sellers started to falter, stammering, as his emotional appeal met unyielding logic. It's a pattern with what some call race hustlers, a term critics use for pundits who, they argue, thrive on division rather than solutions. When pressed, their arguments often unravel, revealing more about self-preservation than progress. This brings us to a broader point, the woke ideology Sellers represents. He later lamented how woke has become a dirty word, co-opted by the right. Originally, he said, it meant awareness of injustice, a Black vernacular term for empathy and action. Fair enough, but Maher chimed in, it's morphed into something else, a catch-all for goofy stuff that defies common sense. Sellers insisted it's still about caring for the marginalized, LGBTQ folks, immigrants, the disabled. To him, rejecting woke means rejecting compassion. But that's a false dichotomy. You can care deeply about people without buying into an ideology that's come to demand conformity and silence dissent. Take the terms evolution. 5 years ago, woke might have meant alertness to systemic wrongs. Today, it's tied to policies, like biological men competing in women's sports, that many see as unfair or illogical. Women train for years, only to lose to competitors with physical advantages rooted in biology, not identity. Critics ask, where's the justice in that? The woke crowd calls it progress. Others call it nonsense. When you question it, though, you're not just wrong, you're hateful. That's where the term lost its way, turning from awareness into a weapon for shutting down debate. Sellers and his ilk, think Don Lemon or Hostin, rely on this dynamic. Their influence hinges on a narrative of perpetual oppression. If they admitted how far America's come, what would they talk about? Their TV gigs, their books, their relevance, it all rests on convincing people nothing's changed. Shapiro's challenge threatens that. He's not saying racism's gone. He's saying it's not 1965. Sellers can't rebut that with data. So he leans on emotion, casting doubt as disrespect. It's a grift, critics say, a way to keep power by keeping people angry. Maher, to his credit, cut through the noise. He's mocked woke himself, but he's clear. He's always been down with fighting injustice. He just doesn't buy the package it comes in now. Sellers tried to guilt trip him, saying dismissing woke dismisses his lived experience. But Maher didn't bite. Neither should we. Caring about people doesn't mean swallowing every claim whole. It means wrestling with reality, not just feelings. So where does this leave us? Sellers floundered because his argument couldn't stand scrutiny. Shapiro won the day not by denying history, but by demanding precision. Maher played referee, exposing the flaws in both camps. The real takeaway? Race in America is messy, progress is uneven, racism lingers, but the 1960s are long gone. Sellers' father's pain is real, but it doesn't make 2025 into 1954. Pretending, otherwise, isn't truth. It's strategy. And when the cameras stop rolling, it's the rest of us left sorting fact from narrative, wondering when common sense became the enemy.